what do we mean by overflows? Well, when we look at content within specific areas of our page, so for example a container, you can see at the moment on my page I've got a div element here with an ID of container, which we'll be styling up in our style sheet in a moment. I'm going to put some content in here. I'm just going to place some text in. Now when I place, say, text in and give this div a specified height, what's going to happen if the text will overflow that specific height? Now if you don't know what I mean, I'll go ahead and put some content into this container. We'll start styling the container up, and then we'll start looking at overflows. And this is a really useful aspect of CSS that's often overlooked because, you know, the right overflow isn't thought out beforehand. Content spills over the edge of things, and it, you know, doesn't look all that nice. So let's go ahead and just type in this is some content. And let's go ahead and just copy and paste this, you know, couple of times, just, well, not a couple but quite a few times, just so we've got quite a bit of content on our page. Okay, so you can see that we've got this here. Let's go ahead and start to style up this container, give it some width, give it a background, you know, just so we can start to try and push this content over the edge of the div, you know, and then see what we can do with this overflow property. So let's go ahead and give this some properties. So I'm going to give it a width of 200 pixels. I'm going to give it a background of AAA, so sort of like a grey colour. Yeah, that's it. We'll see how that looks so far. You can see that what's happened is we've got this long container. Now what's happened is the container has now stretched to fill this content. So if for example we took some content out, it will, you know, stretch back or shrink back, and if we put some, you know, in again, it will expand again. So we've now got a container that will automatically expand with our content, which is good. You know, this is something that we might want. However, what happens if we, you know, need to keep this container a specific height? Now we can take advantage of the minimum height and maximum height properties, or the minimum height property. So for example, if I was to say, let's get rid of all of this, you can see that this has shrunk, you know, to here. Let's say we wanted the container sort of this kind of size. We could use the minimum height property. We can introduce that to say, well, I want the minimum height to be 250 pixels. So that will give it a height that it should be. Now if anything flows over this height, so like that, you'll see it will expand, okay? But if we go ahead and we give, you know, we'll get rid of minimum height, and I want to give this a height of 300 pixels. So I've set a height to this container, which will probably be around here somewhere. When I refresh, oh no, it's about there. But when I refresh, let's make it a bit smaller. You can see that all of this content has sort of spilled over the edge of the div, which, you know, is a shame, because if we do need to keep our container area specific heights, it could even be an entire content section on our page that we want to, you know, keep a specific height. We need to do something about this. Now we need to set an overflow handler, if you like. It's a property, but it'll essentially say, well, you know, when all this content spills over, what do you want me to do with it? Now by default, the action that we've seen by default is visible. So if I say, sorry, not display, overflow visible, we'll get exactly the same result as we can see at the moment. Nothing's changed. This is the default behavior. The overflow of the container will still be visible. It will just hang over the edge of it. Okay, so what if we want this content to you know, create a scroll bar? So we might want it to create a scroll bar so we can scroll down for the rest of the element. Well, in that case we will use overflow scroll. Sorry, we could use overflow auto. We could also use overflow scroll, but there's a fundamental difference between overflow auto, which does this. Okay, so it's automatically added a scroll bar in there so we can scroll down now. Quite neat. Or we could use overflow scroll, which does almost the same thing, but you'll notice the scroll bar appear down here as well. You can see it here without any you know, means to scroll. Now the difference between overflow auto and overflow scroll is overflow auto will add a scroll bar only if the content expands or goes over the width of that div. So if it spills over that width, it will add a scroll bar. Overflow scroll will always have a scroll bar visible, regardless of whether the content is below the height of the div or over the height of the div. The scroll bar will always be visible, if not active to be used. So that's the difference between them. Most likely you will want auto, but if you always want to show the scroll bar, then that's fine. You can do that. Now there is a trick we can use with this. Instead, let's say we always wanted to show the scroll bar. Okay, so we would go ahead and would say, well, I want the overflow to scroll because I always want a scroll bar visible. Now we want to go ahead and get rid of this one here. Let me just show you actually quickly what's going to happen if we have not a lot of content. Okay, so you can still see that these scroll bars are visible. Now what happens if I only want this vertical scroll bar to be visible? Well, in that case we can choose a different property. We can say overflow X or overflow Y. So I could say overflow Y scroll. When I refresh, you can see that we've just got this scroll bar now on the y-axis. So we can specify how we want this to be handled vertically and horizontally as well as both. By default it will handle both. So now that we've determined that, we can say, well, overflow Y, I want to scroll. We've already got some content in there. We already see the scroll bar, but then if we add more content, the scroll bar becomes active because it actually has a use. So now we get to use the scroll bar. So it's likely that you might want to keep the scroll bar in. In that case, you would use the overflow scroll property, and you can specify either in the Y or the X axis. Okay, so in another circumstance, what happens if we want the content to be hidden altogether? So any content larger than that content area, we want to clip it essentially, and we want to get rid of any existing. Now, or any overflow. This is really useful for things like images. If you have a specific container that you want to display an image in, but you want to clip the image off at a certain point, for example, or you want to clip it off and be able to move it around. There's endless possibilities or reasons you'd want to use the overflow hidden property value. So I'll just show you overflow hidden. Now what this will do is you'll see it will just clip it off. So there's nothing down here anymore. It's just essentially hidden it. It still exists. If we look in the markup, you can still see that we've got all of this content. However, it's just not visible, so it's still there. So there are uses for that. It seems like, why would I want to cut content off? But you can almost guarantee that at some point while you are, designing a site, especially if it's very content heavy, there's going to be a point where you might want to cut the content off. Anyway, that's the overflow property in CSS. We've looked at the scroll, the hidden, the auto, the difference between scroll and auto, the default value, and obviously last one, this hidden, which will just cut content off.